So, I'm a 26-year-old male, and I had been planning a camping trip with my wife and dad for a whole year. I wanted everything to be perfect, as we don't get away from town and dive deep into the woods as much as I'd like. This takes place in the very tree-dense Davy Crockett National Forest in East Texas. Earlier that day, my dad decided to go a little early and pick out a good spot for us to camp. To give a layout of where we camped, there were two dirt roads on either side of us, and an overlook to the north of us. We camped in the middle between the two roads. My wife and I arrived and met my dad down there at around 11 a.m. We set up camp and proceeded to enjoy the day until around dinner time, when we started to cook our meal for the evening. Right as we got done with dinner, we see this truck circling around our campsite. He went around us several times and finally pulled right up into our camp and got out of his truck. He then proceeded to tell us that this was his family's campsite and how the firewood that was laying around was his. Now, in this particular forest, campsites are first come, first serve, and my dad had been there since 9 a.m. He then asked if he could camp next to us, and of course, being friendly, we said yes. We didn't know that when he said next to us, he meant directly on top of us. He backed his camper in so close to our tents and vehicles that he blocked my truck in. We weren't sure why he was doing this, being that there were so many other campsites available, but we just shrugged it off and tried to have a good time anyways. Not too long after that, we noticed a white Dodge dually circling around us. We had an off feeling from this truck because it went around several times, but we dismissed it because the area we were at was popular due to the overlook. After a long night of drinking and goofing off, we decided to go to bed. I was in a dead sleep when out of the woods I wake up to a blood-curdling scream. I jolt up and ask my wife, "What the fuck was that?" About 30 seconds later, we hear another scream off in the distance. At this point, I grabbed my gun and unzipped the tent so we could see out. My dad had left a lantern burning so we could see a little ways into our campsite. At that moment, we see the white Dodge dually tearing down the road behind us. They continued down the road until they were out of sight. We heard them stop and get out of their truck, slamming the door and screaming. Then they proceeded to get back in the truck and drive very slowly down the other road that was in front of our campsite. At this point, we were terrified, thinking they were coming to rob us, but they kept driving till they were out of sight. Then we heard them shooting. After the gunshots ended, they sped off. At this point, we thought that maybe they were just drunk and acting stupid, so we didn't call the cops. And we didn't have a signal anyways. We just tried to go back to sleep. The next day, we had to make a beer run for my dad. When we made it out of the camping area and hit the main highway, there were police everywhere. They had stopped two young boys. We assumed they were the ones who were being troublemakers the night before and continued on into town. When we got back to our campsite, the cops were leaving after talking to my dad. They told my dad that the guys in the white dually had gone into the young guys' camp while they were hunting and were robbing them. The boys walked up on their camp being robbed, and the dually guys pulled out guns on the young boys, proceeding to rob the boys at gunpoint. We think if it hadn't been for the people that camped right on top of us, as strange as it was, they would have robbed us instead. They made our campsite look bigger than it actually was. The people in the white dually were never caught. So, for the people in the white Dodge dually, let's not meet, because you might end up with a bullet.
Me and a few of my buddies go camping every summer. It's been something we have done since we graduated from high school. There were 4 of us, and we always had a really good time. After we graduated from college, we continued to do this. I was 23 years old when the strangest thing happened to us. We found a camping spot about a 5 or 6 hour walk from where we parked. This was not an incorporated camping area. Hell, we didn't even know if we were allowed to camp there or if we were trespassing. The first night went by fine. Nothing happened at all. We fished a bit in a nearby stream. The second night, we were all sitting around the fire drinking a little, smoking a little. We did the traditional scary storytelling as well. We stayed up late until the night. I, in fact, was so drunk I can't remember when I fell asleep. But for some reason, I ended up in my buddy Jack's tent. None of us put the fire out before passing out, which was bad. When I woke up, I was trying to figure out where I was. I was still pretty drunk and high. Jack was in the tent with me, but it was a big tent, so he was pretty far away from me. I mean, nothing happened if that is what you were thinking. I tried to figure out what woke me up. After a couple of moments, I heard a sound of someone walking around. It didn't alarm me at first, because there were 2 other of us, so I didn't seem to worry. Soon I saw the outline of a figure walking around the fire. He stood there for a moment, and I just assumed again that it was one of my friends. He turned and faced the tent and stood there for a minute. It was then that I realized that this was not one of my friends. The man was much bigger. If you watch wrestling and know who Braun Strowman is, this man was likely around the size of him. And he just stood in front of the tent, obviously looking at us, his opposing figure looming over me. I tried not to move, in hopes that he did not know I had been watching him. After a while, he finally turned away. He picked up what I assumed was a bucket of water and threw it over the fire. The fire went out. Then I couldn't see him anymore and didn't know where he was. I laid in the tent, afraid to go back to sleep. Soon, however, the drunkenness took over and I passed out. I woke up to Jake shaking me. He was scared. He told me we had to pack and get out of the woods. I was cranky and thought he was acting weird. But when I got out of the tent and looked at the fire pit we made, it was covered in blood. The man from the night used a bucket of some sort of blood to put out our fire. It was more than enough to scare the hell out of us. We quickly packed up and tried quickly to get to the car. We kept expecting the big hillbilly to get us and to come with more crazy huge men, but it never happened. We got to the car and drove home. We continued our camping fun in future years, but we never went back to that place ever again.
When I shared my previous camping story on here, I was reminded of another unsettling experience I had, which also took place at a campground. This time I was with my father, but I was young and oblivious to what was going on. My father used to enjoy going to this campground, not far from the hometown he grew up in. The campground was in Cavendish, Vermont. It was called Caton Place. He enjoyed how peaceful and remote the area was. Having been there a few times and observing that it was family-friendly, he thought it would be nice to bring his daughter with him. Choosing to go around the same time of year that he went the last few times, he saw familiar faces. There was this campsite of 3 men who were out-of-staters in their 40s. Most likely were from Boston because of their accent. They had a big fancy trailer, and the entire site was decked out with a dartboard, hammock, lawn chairs, garden gnomes, and patches of fake grass. From observation, it looks like they stay there a couple of weeks at a time. All settled in. Quite comfortable. Too comfortable, actually. To the point where they walk around with a sense of superiority, boastful and loud. They acted like they owned the place. The place was actually run by an elderly couple. These macho-acting goons were quite friendly with them. The year before, they painted the playground for them for free, so the elderly couple loved these guys. My father saw these men around last time, but didn't have to deal with them or worry much because their camp was situated far apart. This time, unfortunately, we were placed quite close to them, with only one empty campsite separating us. We were surrounded by other empty campsites too, but about 30 feet away there was also a middle-aged couple camping out. Here's where the story starts. We arrive and set up our camp. I remember observing those men across from us. My father waved a friendly hello to them, and they waved back. Throughout the day, I played on the playground. By nighttime, we roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. Meanwhile, those macho goons across the way were partying hard. Booze everywhere and blaring tunes on the radio. Lots of laughs and bickering, too. We didn't pay much attention or look over that way. We were keeping to ourselves. Tired yawns, we crawl into our tent to fall asleep, but all the ruckus was still going on. I was able to fall asleep, but my father was not. He laid there for a few hours and kept checking the time occasionally. It was getting closer to midnight. He wondered if the middle-aged couple nearby were having trouble sleeping over this noise too. Then the sound can be heard of a vehicle coming down the road. It was the elderly man who owns the place. He stops and lets the men know there's been a noise complaint. The men apologize profusely and say that they'll be settling in to sleep soon. The owner leaves. They immediately start cussing and throwing things around their campsite as soon as the owner was out of sight. They were offended that somebody had reported them. "Who do you think did it?" one asked the others. "Well, it's either the guy over there with the little girl next to us, or the other couple over there," the other guy responds. Third guy adds, "I didn't see any of them leaving their car to go to the front desk, so one of these people must have a cell phone." This was 1997 or 1998, so cell phones weren't as common back then. These men then began conspiring to figure out who owns the cell phone. They weren't trying very hard to speak in hushed tones because my father could hear everything. "I bet it's that asshole with the Cadillac who owns the cell phone. I'm going over there," one of them says. They're talking about my father. He does not have a cell phone, though. The feeling of pure fear came over him. He has no idea what's going to happen and needs to think fast. The sound of stumbling footsteps come right up just inches away from our tent. What to do? What to do? My dad thought of making a noise. Any noise. He grabbed the soda can next to him and flicked the top of it with his fingers. The guy is startled and takes a step backwards. He then scurries away back to his drunk buddies. They're now whispering amongst themselves. He can't pick up on what they're saying, but catches the part where they say they're going to try again later. He wonders if he heard that right. What the hell are these guys trying to do? There's no way my father is going to try to fall asleep now. In fact, he's not feeling tired at all. Hopped up on so much adrenaline right now from the fear. Man with his daughter, feeling helpless, only a soda can and flashlight to protect us. My dad lays there frozen, listening, hoping these guys will just give it up and maybe sleep off their drunken craziness. A short time passes, and here come the footsteps again. Their campfire is so bright that it casts a shadow onto our tent. He can literally see the shadow of the man coming towards us. The man doesn't get as close this time because, again, he stops at the noise coming from our tent. My dad had unzipped his sleeping bag in a panic, ready to defend and protect us in case this man was going to try to come into our tent. The man is not moving anymore. He's just standing there, watching us. My dad remembered he had a lighter in his pocket. He took it out and from underneath the blanket flicked the switch on it. He was hoping it would mimic the sound of getting a gun ready. I don't think it worked, but the man eventually did turn around and go back to his campsite. "You won't believe this. They're still awake." "What the fuck?" they all sputter amongst themselves. Maybe, just maybe, being around 2:30 a.m. now, they will finally go to sleep. Nope. At this point, I'm still asleep, but I'm tossing and turning a lot. My feet slap against the side of the tent a couple of times. The footsteps are approaching us again, while I brush my feet against the side of the tent. "Ugh," the man says with an exasperated sigh. He starts to walk away, but not to his campsite. He's walking towards the road, walks a few feet, stops, and screams at the top of his lungs. "If I find out who reported us, I'll kill you. You hear me? I'll effing kill you." Everything is still now. Only sounds that can be heard are the crackling of their campfire and the occasional indistinct chatter amongst the men. Then, finally, the sound of their trailer door shutting at 5 a.m. They're asleep. My dad lays there trying to process everything that's happened. By 6 a.m., he wakes me up to pack and get out of there. I remember him rushing me, and I was very confused. My dad then said he's never going camping again. That statement is still true. He's never been camping since. I have so many questions, though. What did they want? Why did they need us to be asleep to sneak up on us? Did they want to harm my dad or myself? Did they want to steal the cell phone that he never had? I guess we'll never know, but it's so scary to think about. And I know that my father should have talked to the owners and made a police report too. I'm not sure if it crossed his mind in those moments. I assume in that sleepless night state of mind, he just wanted to get away. far away and back into the comfort of his own